From superhero romps deciding to double down on the ludicrous, to apparent horrors being classed as absurdist comedy by the stars involved, these movies were later revealed to be more than what they initially seemed. I'm Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 movies you weren't supposed to take seriously. Number 10, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. After making a career out of shocking, challenging, and sometimes even moving his audience unexpectedly, it's safe to say that you can always bet on whatever Quentin Tarantino churns out next, stealing a whole host of headlines upon its release. And as expected, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood did precisely that in 2019, with everything from the film's jaw-dropping rewriting of Sharon Tate's murder at the hands of the Manson family, to Bruce Lee getting his ass handed to him by Brad Pitt's Cliff Booth, all dividing audiences seemingly from the get-go. When it comes to that latter piece of controversial action, Tarantino was quick to fire back at those, including Lee's daughter, who claimed the director framed the martial arts legend as an arrogant a-hole who was full of hot air. He'd even go as far to state on the Joe Rogan Experience that everyone who had a problem with his depiction of Lee, outside of his family, could go suck a D. In short, if you've got a serious problem with Tarantino's revisionist history, who gives a fudge? The director is playing in his own sandbox and doesn't care if you take his flick seriously or not. Number 9, Midsummer. With this being the same director who finds a lot of the stuff that goes down in another one of his movies, Hereditary, funny, it shouldn't come as that much of a surprise to find that Ari Aster views one of his other more horrific entries as something that borders on dark comedy, setting out with the goal to unsettle his audience in the most unique and creative ways imaginable. The obvious graphic horror on show throughout the undoubtedly chilling flick achieves that aim and then some, but it's in the need to leave fans chuckling awkwardly or outright bursting out into laughter at unanticipated moments of hilarity that cement 2019's memorable folk horror Midsummer as perhaps one of the most unlikely comedies ever brought into existence. And that's not to say that the film has been entirely crafted with this genre in mind. It does still boast enough gut-wrenching death and truly shocking visuals to leave you hurling into your popcorn. But when approaching this entity as a picture designed to tickle your funny bone in the most unusual ways imaginable, you may even find yourself dancing around with a flower wreath on your head before resuming chucking up into said popcorn box. Number 8, The Lighthouse. Robert Eggers' frequently horrifying and always surreal The Lighthouse made for a strange old ride from start to finish, and with the flick picking up some strong reviews out of the gates after a trailer which revealed wisely very little about the end product that was actually heading our way, moviegoers were keen to see what all the fuss was about as it finally splashed onto the scene in 2019. What they were delivered was a picture as hard to define as the two leading men's accents, with Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson roaring around a lighthouse and taking part in other massively mind-melting visuals as the duo slowly lost their minds on the big screen. And much like Midsummer, this gripping monster wasn't designed solely to be mulled over as a piece of fine art. It's meant to leave you feeling a tad dirty and in need of a quick rewatch of Twilight to get over the all-round confusion and anxiousness conjured up by the experience. Can't go wrong with a lie down in a dark room afterwards either. Number 7, Venom. At this point in his already captivating career, the mighty Tom Hardy has found himself in the envious position of being able to pick and choose precisely what projects he'd like to be involved in next, frequently challenging himself with new physicalities, accents, and mindsets to bury into on the big screen. So, with news eventually breaking that Hardy would be stepping back into the supersphere as Eddie Brock in a standalone Venom flick, you had to assume the incoming project was destined to be a piece of can't-miss super cinema. However, for those expecting to see the Brits given the same sort of material that immortalized his indomitable Bane in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, the Sony flick that ultimately landed on their screens came as a bit of an unwanted shock. However, when taken in and enjoyed for precisely what it is, a gloriously chaotic mismatch of tones with a brilliant central turn from the always gripping leading man, Venom was an absolute riot, pun most definitely intended. And with the anything but critically acclaimed film going on to be a bona fide hit at the box office, Sony were wise to double down on this central symbiote odd couple for the eventual Andy Serkis-led sequel. Less said about everything else in that film though, the better. Number 6, The Greatest Showman. Any feature that is tasked with depicting the life of controversial American showman P.T. Barnum is always going to understandably catch some serious flack if it refuses to really shine a light on the frequent exploitation and abuse that led to his success. So it was little surprise to see that the Hugh Jackman starring musical by the name of The Greatest Showman felt the heat from critics by the time it danced into cinemas back in 2017. But that partial critical drubbing still couldn't stop the film from going on to become a genuine juggernaut at the box office. And and a family favorite whenever said unit feels the need to have a warble on a Sunday evening. And it's not too difficult to see why. Now, there's still no getting away from the dark and unsettling history of the central figure in real life, but the film in general boasts a message of inclusivity and acceptance, and is sang into existence with a whole host of tunes that can light a fire under the most pessimistic of bellies. As a slice of cheesy, heartwarming fun for all the family, The Greatest Showman achieved exactly what it set out to accomplish. Number 5. Most of Michael Bay's movies. The movie theater isn't solely reserved for tales of real-life figures dramatically overcoming the odds, and deeply compelling courtroom dramas capable of making the Academy sit up in their seats. And one man has seemingly made it his sole mission to provide a form of entertainment that is tailored towards the complete antithesis of that particular crowd. The vast majority of Michael Bay's output since his Bad Boys feature debut has very much been geared towards those who want to switch their brains off, listen to some cringe-inducing dialogue, and watch stuff blow up in slow motion. In other words, as noted by the man himself, I make movies for teenage boys, oh dear, what a crime. Now sure, Bay's films most certainly aren't for everyone, with many understandably yearning for a slice of logic and nuance with their explosive set pieces from time to time. But there's no questioning that everything from Armageddon to Transformers has left teenagers punching the air in delight, likely due to the fact they don't take any of what they just witnessed all that seriously. Number 4. Starship Troopers. Not every film has the luxury of being respected and saluted from the minute it is released onto an unsuspecting public. But those films that do flop into existence aren't necessarily condemned to be criticized and shunted for eternity. Look no further than Paul Verhoeven's 1997 sci-fi epic Starship Troopers, as an example of a flick that only became truly appreciated for what it was some 20 years after its blasting off into our universe. Slammed for its crazed, lurid spectacle in the New York Times, and buried by many other critics around the time of its release, the apparently one-dimensional feature, as claimed by the legendary Roger Ebert, seems to have had its whole point missed by the vast majority of said experts. The flick is a feature-long self-aware dig at right-wing militarism, and once that penny well and truly drops, a 129-minute journey of comedic genius ensues. Everything from the knee-jerk violent reaction to unknown entities, to the brilliant uses of propaganda favoring the United Citizen Federation, acted as an outstanding send-up, further hammering home that this flick wasn't ever destined to be digested as a tasteful dose of sci-fi cinema. Number 3. Malignant. Of the many balmy offerings ushered into cinemas during the pandemic age of movie making, few have matched James Wan's 2021 memorable Malignant when it comes to mixing an outrageous concept with routinely graphic horror. But for those entering theaters preparing themselves for a film in the same vein of Wan's other recent efforts, in the likes of the Conjuring series or even a film skewed towards franchise building in the likes of the Fast series or Aquaman, Wan had a few surprises up his sleeve. In wanting to stretch his horror muscles, the horror maestro conjured up the darkly hilarious tale of a woman whose visions of murders happening in real life end up having some rather unforeseen origins. Equipped with her teratoma twin bro living inside her skull, Annabelle Wallace's Madison sets out popping crowds left, right, and center, with some of the most riotous murder sprees you're ever likely to see on the big screen. If you're looking for a slow burn horror that chips away at your innermost insecurities and keeps you up at night, but for a new spin on the phrase "it's all in my head," Malignant is the gift that keeps on giving. Number 2. The Wicker Man. If ever there was a project that summed up the now legendary theatricality that one Nicolas Cage utilizes to stunning perfection whenever he's given the chance to go full Cage, the 2006 Wicker Man remake is that film. But while many were quick to label the apparent horror as an unintentionally hilarious attempt at putting a new spin on the classic Christopher Lee starring 1973 flick, Cage has since gone on record to state that this was actually the intention all along. Speaking to IndieWire back in 2013, Cage would note that The Wicker Man is probably the best example of a movie where people are mystified because they think for some reason that we did not know it was humorous. Going further, the star would highlight how it would be pretty damn hard for both himself and director Neil LaBute to not know the film was absurdist comedy. What with Cage being dressed in a bear suit doing these ridiculous things with the matriarchal society on the island. Cage has also expressed his desire, in his words, to take the Wicker Man to Japan, except this time he's a ghost. Nicolas Cage, ladies and gentlemen. Number 1. The Room. Tommy Wiseau's infamous and now largely adored The Room was initially received as a rather botched attempt at bringing a serious piece of work to life, with immortalized dreadful deliveries of lines like "You're tearing me apart, Lisa," and the always handy "Oh, hi, Mark," and a narrative that seems to have no earthly idea what it's trying to achieve or where in the hell it's going. The film soon picked up steam as an unlikely bizarre night out for those who enjoyed the so bad it's good stylings of Wiseau and the gang. And while it's hard to look past this flick being anything more than a poor attempt at dramatic cinema, Wiseau himself has since reappraised the work as a black comedy, stating that in any movie you have to have different flavors, and it is up to the audiences how they react to them. The Room certainly comes equipped with more flavors than a Baskin-Robbins counter, so it's down to you whether you decide to strap in and analyze this as a botched piece of drama or an apparent conscious attempt to tickle you with melodrama. Either way, you're in for a hell of a ride, folks.